we have Igor Lucena, research economist at the Brazil-Africa Institute. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So the first question is, why is the Brazil-Africa Forum important in the conversation on the global economy?
Well, we see that we have a lot of problems in the global economy. The landscape that brought us here 70 years ago of liberalism, of exchanges and flow of people, finance, resources is changing. A lot of protectionism, a lot of countries are closing themselves to commerce, and that's very bad for the global economy as a whole. And I think that the forum, as we see it, we bring together not only Brazil, but a lot of African countries and other countries that have interest in these kinds of relationships. And it's going against this tide and creating a more open space where a forum of debates, of the resurgence of liberalism, of exchanges, of how the countries can work together in a very specific way. Different from the past, we are not working alone with governments. We are working in a trilateral way, which unites governments, of course, but we have here entrepreneurs, businessmen, companies, and also international institutions that together creates a bond that helps the economy to develop in a more international way.
You talk about governments. I mean, they are an important part of the forum. So what economic tools can governments use to address issues relating to food security?
Yes, when we see that governments are adapting themselves to a more different way, in the past governments used to see themselves as the biggest players in international relations among countries, and that has changed. They understand they are very big players, but they can't do everything together. And since food security is one of the biggest issues for this century and for the next one, they need to understand how to develop tools that they can't have. For example, how can they help startup companies and new technologies that come from other countries to integrate themselves into their reality? They can't do them by themselves. They need to understand how other countries have developed or created solutions for these kinds of problems, and how can they bring them to their own reality. What I think is that reduced bureaucracy from the governments is a very important tool, but also work together with companies from local countries and others outside that can help the countries to be more technological, more advanced. What we see and what mostly of our examples here in Brazil have worked is that improvements in technology and productivity are key for providing food security in all countries, most specific in African countries. In the last 20 years, Brazil have grown more than 400% the production of food, but our land used was just 60% more, which is more than 200% of productivity. And that was created using more technology from the private sector. I think that governments need to understand how to cooperate with the private sector. Private sector does not exist only to pay taxes and help the revenue from the government, but is a symbiotic situation together, or more specific, win-win relationship. And of course, when we have win-win relationships, we have more jobs, we have low interest rates, and we create something which is very important, the confidence of international investors to go to these countries. When the governments respect contracts, they respect companies, they respect how they work, and they work together to create new solutions to problems from today, such as food security. New investors come to the country because they believe that is a good opportunity to create jobs and also to get profit. And when the governments understand that reality, they can grow together with the companies. That's one important tool. It's a mindset that the governments must have right now.
So, I mean, you've given us a breakdown of what governments need to do. Are they receptive of the advice given by the Brazil-Africa Institute? Are they receptive?
Yes, I think they are. Since this environment of countries closing themselves, I think we are the Brazil-Africa Institute, and what we do here, I was always saying that we are a beacon of light, so how the countries can work together. Our idea in these days is bring everyone together and create this trilateral situation where international institutions as development banks, as chambers of commerce, our think tanks as well, and the governments come here with their representatives and the companies saying what they want to do to help a new environment. Of course, our main idea is how to develop food security. But to develop food security, we have to bring to the countries good infrastructure. We have to give incentives from the companies to go to the countries and invest. And of course, they want profit back. But when they have profit back, they create jobs, they pay interests, they pay taxes. And I think that's a good solution. I think the global economy cannot be seen as worlds apart. From our perspective, from Brazilian perspective, the cultural heritage and the similarities of landscape and economic problems are very much alike with a lot of African countries, most specific the countries that speak Portuguese language, because we have a common heritage. And in the last years that the Institute has been created, what I see is that the interchange of ideas and concrete actions has been accepted. We have now a lot of companies, Brazilian companies, that invest in food sector and other sectors in African countries. And also we see here that mainly African investors and African scientists that want to see how Brazilian has developed the agricultural technology come here to see how that works. In a more global and sensitive way, what I think is that the African continent as a whole is the new opportunity for the global landscape. We see that we have a lot of liquidity from the developed countries. We have a lot of low interest rates, a lot of euros and dollars floating around in the financial markets, and they have to go somewhere for real activities, real productivity, real economy, real sector. They will go definitely to the African countries. What I see is that in the 21st century, African development countries will be as a specific and will have a big growth, just as Latin America was 100 years ago. And we cannot see what happened here and let that pass. That's one important idea. Brazil must be more in touch with Africa and to help to create solutions for their problems based on our experience and grow together as a global economy.
So you've given us a very interesting picture of the relationship between Brazil and Africa. So for investors who are nervous about getting into the African market, what do you have to say to them?
Well, the African markets are not linear. We have countries that have more security, more institutional environment than others. What I see and what is being developed with a lot of BRICS countries, mostly China, Russia, India, of course South Africa that's already there, is that some arrangements are being done. For example, investors in a lot of countries have, from these multilateral institutions, the development banks, guarantees, long-term financial contracts that make sure that their investments will pay off in the long term, such as 5, 10 years. What I see is that almost the same problems we had here. People do not know what they're gonna find. And one good thing that the Brazil Africa Institute brings is ideas and is knowledge. Some investors with fear what they don't know the bureaucracy, they don't know what are the relations and how they can find that in African countries. they find here partners that are African. They know how to work in their country. They can help build the path to bring that investors inside and work together. This kind of joint ventures has been made with Brazilian companies, and I think it is a very good path for bringing investors to African countries. And of course, a very good help will come from multilateral institutions that are linked. They know how the country works, they know their laws, they know how to finance these enterprises to come to the African countries and help develop a new environment. Of course, the government have their paper. They have to enforce the security for the investor to come. And I think this kind of events, this kind of discussions between countries, enterprises and multilateral institutions, that's the path to develop the African continent as a whole, even though there's a lot of differences.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for those points.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.